This is our final Monday, May 22nd. For those of you who are stars watching this because you're wanting to finish out the Camp D choices, welcome. There's a whole bunch of these you don't watch. I'll also be able to watch tomorrow, so I'll be recording that one too. It's nice to have you here. I am going to babble for a little bit first. I have to cover other things, and then we'll get into the stories, so you can just sort of fast forward if need be. So we covered all these things with you guys. We're good to go. We have a Charger Challenge. Hopefully the stars, we're going to beat you, so take that. We're just good to go there. In here, Zoe, who just left, doesn't help me at all. That, for those of you, and no one else wants to send that, so we're good to go. I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but real quick with what I have up there for the calendar. Here's what we have coming up this week. I'm going to finish out the choice, my second choice here in a moment, and I'll finish that story with you and some bits that go around it. And then tomorrow, I'm going to get into my third poor choice, which I didn't get a chance to really talk about at all when we were at Camp Tecumseh, and I'll finish that one out tomorrow. Wednesday is not one of my poor choices. It's sort of my life choices. And the one on Wednesday is one of the first talks I sort of went into. When kids refer to my Brovicast talks, they refer basically to the 3 stories as one big one, and then Wednesdays as the separate one. That is the memorable one, but Wednesday is that big day. And then we have the yearbook dance after school. And then Thursday, if you're unfamiliar, our schedule's a little screwy because you don't really have first period. You're going to spend first period with doing the field day. We run around, do all those fun activities and stuff like that. So really you get to spend like 2.5 hours with your first period class, and then the rest of your classes are about a half hour. So this class will meet, but we're only going to meet for about 20-25 minutes on Thursday, because it's like a delay day kind of schedule, so it's going to be a little bit off on that one. And we don't have 6th or 7th period on Thursday, because we have the Heroes Awards ceremony on Thursday. So you're going to go to 6th period, have enough time to go, hey, I'm here, high five, and then you're going to take off and then head down. Which means on Thursday, you get to finish the day with me, because I'm the one that runs the Heroes Awards ceremony. So I will be the last smiling face you get a chance to see before you then take off on that day. Now given, Mrs. Melling and Mrs. Randall will be there, but they don't like to talk as much as I do, so I do a lot of talking on that day. Mr. Wagley will be here on Thursday, and he will be there at the awards ceremony. This is where we're going to be giving out Students of the Year. I have one, Mrs. Randall has one, Melling has one, Wagley has one. Cadet teachers they got to pick on. We all get to talk about all these wonderful kids and stuff like that. And then you guys get to take off and you are done. Our discussion on Thursday, I have a few talks I will save for Thursday because they're not as big or as long, but one of them I will tease, which may be one of the options we get into, is I got into one fight when I was in school, like actual fight, like fisting and blood and the dying, stuff like that. And so that is one of the stories I can tell on Thursday. Or there's some other ones I can tease. I have a bunch of them I haven't had a chance to get to yet. And then after that, you're good to go. Zaire?
So you said that you always run every like Heroes event. So are you like the mascot of the Heroes team?
Something like that.
No, kind of.
I like mascot works for me. DJ?
Did you take the L or W?
Right. Have I told that story yet?
No.
There you go.
So,
So that's why you get to come back on Thursday.
no.
Or not. It's fine
That's
with
what
me
my
too.
hair says.
Well, then I guess you want to hear it. So, with the story I told you guys at camp, one, I don't think that's going to happen again for a long time. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but the guy I replaced is coming back. So I was a sort of a one-time stand-in, and they're like, that went well, but he's going to come back again. And I was like, all right, so be it. And so he's going to come back in, so that might be the only time I get a chance to tell stories at camp, which was fun. I mean, except for the storm that ruined it partway through, but other than that, it was overall pretty fun. With those, the only drawback to doing it at camp is I have pictures that go along with the stories that I didn't get a chance to show you. So I'm going to put those pictures up today and just sort of like touch onto it as we go through them. The other thing is I have to back up a little bit into the stories because the one we get into today, the one that I did when I was 14, is the toughest story for me to tell. Because the one here when I was 7 years old, that's not a tough story for me to tell. I find that one more funny than anything else. I was 7 years old and I broke into a house because I was trying to find a place to play like a fort. So I find that funny. When I was 14, it wasn't funny. I was a bad kid. I did bad things. And so I still have a lot of guilt that I carry because of that. And so that is a tougher story for me to get into. I get choked up telling that story because I still feel bad about what I did. And then the story I get into tomorrow is easier for me to tell also. It's still bad. I still got arrested, but I was arrested more for stupidity than being bad. So I don't feel as guilty on that one. But shoplifting was just bad. There's no other way to get into it from there. So I have a tougher time with that story. With that one, this one, when I told you about breaking into that house, I talked about the little crawl space that went along with it. This is exactly how I remember it being. So I went on and found little Google images to help me out. It was a little sliding little window where it had the two little panes that had to go over the little silver thing. And you can see how scary and rusty and nasty and cloudy, that's what it was. Where you can imagine spiders on the other side, the size of a baby's fist. That's what I was imagining. And so when I pulled that thing back, it did the whole little squeaky, and I was like, oh, this is going to be awful. That's what it was when I went into it. When I talked about the little folding door, this was the folding door. It was right behind that was the furnace and the air conditioner and stuff like that. These slats go downy. For some reason, I always thought they went the other way when I was in there, so I don't know if the door was installed backward. I have no idea. All I know is that the light came down, and that was how I knew to go in the right direction because the beam of light came down to direct me. But it was that kind of door that I pushed on and popped open. And I tried to use my memory as best I could. This was how I remember the house being set up, where you had the front door, which we only used the one time to go running and screaming out of, and then in the back, which was here, was the sliding glass door which led into the kitchen. You had a kitchen with like a little sliding glass door, and then I think this is more kitchen over here. And then you had these two rooms. There was like a dining room and a front room, and then the front room sort of went to where the stairs were. And then there was the upstairs, which I don't remember as much. I know we went up there to play, but we didn't do as much upstairs. Mostly just played in this downstairs area. And then below the stairs was the little heating and drying room kind of thing. And I know the garage was on that side. And that's only because we never went into the garage, because there was like a bunch of like tools and stuff out there. And that like, ah. Plus, we rode our bikes by the front of it. You could see like the windows here, front door, and then garagey bits. When I said that my brother and the fourth grader and I hid, this is exactly where we were hiding. It was right here. We could have the kitchen right behind us. We were standing right there and then came running out that front door to take off. This story. With this one, I still remember things vividly from here. Even though I was 14 years old when it happened, there are still things that come back to me that gets me choked up because they are honestly painful memories. And this was never a story I'd ever planned on telling. After it happened, I planned on taking it to the grave. The sooner this story could die, the better. And the reason I started telling it was I started doing little stories. The one on Wednesday, I started just sort of doing little bits of that as time went by. And I had a kid come back who I had in class who was in high school. And she screwed up in high school pretty badly and had gotten arrested. And I remember I was sitting in my chair, and she was sitting in the little chair there, and she was talking to me after school one day. She came by, and she was crying, and was talking about how the fact that her life was over because of this horrible choice she made. And she kept saying, "You don't understand, Mr. Brovicast, you don't understand." And I remember I eventually just said, "I do." She goes, "You don't." And I said, "Dear, I've been arrested." And I remember that moment she went, "Mm-hmm," like her eyes like popped open. She went, "What?" And I was like, "It's not a story I tell, but when I was 14, I got arrested." And she was like, "For what?" And I go, "It's not a story I tell." And she goes, "But," and I was like, "Fine." And it was a big step, because I had never told that story before. But I felt for this kid, and I wanted to help her. So I was like, all right, I've never told this story before. And I went into it, and I told her. And I remember the whole time, her eyes were just huge and staring at me the whole way through. And I just gave her the quick version of it. I didn't go quite into as much detail as I did with you guys. And I got done. I was like, and my life didn't end. And I was able to recover from it. But I felt it did. And I know where you are. And I know you can come back from this. And she was like, "Thank you." And I was like, "You're welcome." And it seemed to help her. But that was it. And I was like, I told the story one time, I'm done. But then she came back years later when she was getting ready to graduate, and it was her senior year. And she came back to talk to me, and she was doing much better. And she said, one of the things that helped me was when you told me that story, and it helped me get through it. And I was like, well, I'm glad it could help. And she was like, have you ever thought about telling that story to your students? I was like, no. I'm like, I'm not going to tell that story to my 7th grader. Like, not an idiot. And she goes, it might have helped me when I was their age. And I'm like, well, yeah. And she was very convincing. And she stuck with it. And she was like, think about it. The fact that it can help. And it's not an easy thing to do, to tap into a story that has that much pain. But I do it because I think it could help. And I remember it was one year I got into a discussion, because I didn't go right into like telling that story right away. I was like, yeah, I'll think about it someday. But it was talking about with outsiders, and then that was then This Is Now, and the choices they made, and the shoplifting that happens, and that life-changing thing. And I hinted around to it in one of my classes, and they got me to tell them the story. And of course, then once I told one class, every other class was like, we heard you got arrested. They came in. I was like, fine. I was like, I'll just take tomorrow, and I'll just tell that story. And I did. And I went ahead and took like the next day to tell that story. And they were like, wow. And I'm like, yeah. And of course, that wasn't the only time I got arrested. And I was like, oh, I just hit him. And they're like, what? And I'm like, oh, yeah. And so it was a slow process of like opening up bit by bit, year by year, to get into it. And I've realized there's things I want you to get from the story, which is what I'm going to get into a bit more today, because you already have the general outline of what happened with it. One was, there are memories from this day that still stick with me. And one of them was going through those glass doors when I had the Banaka in my pocket, which, by the way,
What's the banana?
Banaka, the breath spray I stole. Woo. I had a student buy this for me a couple years ago after I told the story. They went out to a drugstore and bought a package and then brought it to me the last day. And they're like, I bought you that breath spray that you got arrested for. Giggle, giggle, giggle. And I was like, you are a horrible person. But this actually turned out pretty helpful because now I can actually say, this is the stupid stuff I got arrested for. And the package has not changed since the day I stole it. It's like the exact same thing. Because this is what it looked like. It was like a little bubble package. And I just went, ripped it open, took out the breath spray, put it in my pocket, wadded up the rest of it, and then put it on the shelf. And so this is what I was arrested for stealing. And I remember stepping up to those doors in my pocket and the guy's hand coming down on my shoulder. And that is, when I talk about those painful bits, that's one of them that stays with me. And a lot of it was two parts. One, knowing that freedom was on the other side of that door and knowing that my life was changing at that moment. And it's not many times in your life where you can pin it on a moment. And it was this moment where things changed. But it was that moment. I knew at that moment everything was going to change. And it did. And the other thing is, I don't know how strong of a person I was if he had not said that he had me on camera. If I would have run or not. Because that would have been a bad thing to do. And I'd like to say now that I am a strong enough person that I would not be the one that would flee and run like a little bunny. Well, one, I would be a strong enough person to not steal in the first place. But it's not easy being in that position and not running and taking off and fleeing from the problem. And I think if he had not said that, I would have run. And I don't know how my life would have been different if I had run on that day. If I had not had to face the consequences of my choice. If I would not have had to face the things I'm getting ready to tell you about that happened in the fallout from that particular choice, if I'd run that day. But he did say that I have you on camera, and because of that, I did not run. And so it's part of that which still sticks with me to this day, wondering what kind of character you can have. I had a conversation with my daughter this past weekend because something had happened to her about the idea that you can't control bad things happening to you. Bad things are going to happen to everybody. Bad things are part of life. What you can control is how you react to those bad things. And how you react to those bad things is your character. And it's one of the things I told her is the fact that you're always going to have bad things happen. I have bad things happen to me to this day. And I can't control the fact that I'm going to have a bad thing happen to me. But I can control how I'm going to choose to react to that. And that's part of the takeaway from this too, is how I've chosen to react to it. I've taken control of it. When you have a bad thing happen to you, and you will, if you've not done that bad thing yet, you will, because you're human. How do you react to that bad thing that happens to you? How do you take control of it? How do you be the one that controls this thing in your life? Because I also remember sitting in the back room of the store, after he took me through that door, and sitting in a chair like this one, and seeing an exit that was as close as that wall right there, and thinking about running, and that being that choice I could make. And the only reason I did not run was because he said the words, "We have you on camera." And if I had run, how would that change my life to this day? And I remember being led out through the store in handcuffs, and the lady with her daughter being pulled away because I was such a horrible person, walking out the front door, seeing my friends' heads popping around the side of it, with them staring at people I'm still friends with to this day, and seeing those heads down there and being thankful. I mean, at the time, no, but now that we didn't have social media, because that would have so shown up on Snapchat, me like walking like, but luckily it's not there. And being in that cop car, it is weird. Years later, I remember like everything in that drugstore. I remember the stealing. I remember him on my shoulder, the walking, the sitting. Every moment of it, I can still bring back. I can remember the cop ride, the ride in the cop car. I don't remember much about being at the police station. I don't know why. I remember sitting in the room. I remember it being a small room. I remember looking at that wall and the guy, the police officer, making that really nasty remark about my family being up there someday. But that's it. I don't remember much else. I don't remember if it was just because I was so worn out by that point or not much happened. But I don't have much memory until my mom shows up. I remember my mom coming in. And I have a good relationship with my parents. I know not every kid does. And I wasn't a perfect kid, but I like how my parents raised me. They weren't yellers. They were just very loving and matter of the fact. And when my mom came in, she didn't yell at me then either. I remember the first thing she asked me was just, "Did you do it?" She walked in, saw me sitting there, I stood up, and she was, "Did you do it?" And it was a tough question to answer, not because I didn't know the answer, but because how do you admit to this person that you love and trust and respect that you did this horrible thing? So I didn't look her in their eyes, and I just said, "Yeah." And her response was just, "Oh my God." And she just turned, and then walked out, and she said, "Come on." And I remember following her with my head down and then walking out to the front of the police station. I'm sure they checked me out or something like that, but I don't remember anything again until being in the car. And I went and found that was the car that we had, a gray Pontiac Bonneville. And I remember this was early November, like the very beginning of November that it happened. And I remember I was sitting in the front passenger seat, and I had my feet up on the
Dashboard.
Thank you. Yeah, the dashboard. And I had my arms around my legs, and my mom was sitting here driving. And she wasn't yelling. She never yelled the whole time. She was just talking the whole time, just asking, "Did you need it? Did you take it because you need it? Why would you do this? Have you done it before? Why? Can I trust you? Why would you make this choice?" And just that, over and over again. And I had my arms around my legs, and my head was on this cold window, because it was November, so it was cold out. And my head was just resting there. I remember just staring out there at all these dead trees that were driving along, and just thinking about life, and how life was going to change. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but it was just a level of depression that I'm not sure I've ever hit at any point in my life. And I've had family members die, but it's a different feeling than at that moment. But it's close. I say the closest I'd say was feels when I had a family member die. Because I think at that moment I realized part of me had died. That was the day my childhood died. Which is weird as it sounds, but it was, because it changed me forever. And I think I knew it on some level. It's just that change that you go through. We got home, and my mom still wasn't yelling at me. She simply said, "I think you should go up to your room." I said, "Okay." And I went to my room. I remember hearing her making dinner, and my younger brother was home, who was 2 years younger than me, so it was his 7th grade year. And him being like, "Hey, what's up?" And then like seeing my expression, being like, and just not knowing, and him just staring. And I went to my room and shut the door, and him like knocking on the door, me not answering it, and he had no idea what was going on. Remember, I laid down. I had a water bed at the time. My parents had bought for me a couple years before. I remember laying on the water bed, staring at the ceiling, and I still remember sitting there and the thoughts going through my head. was, how does life change at this point? Because I didn't know if I was going to have friends the next day. I didn't know if my friends were going to want to hang out with me because I was now a thief and I'd been arrested. I didn't know if I could go to school. Can you still go to school after you've been arrested for something like this? I didn't know. I was in 2 advanced classes. Were they going to pull me out of my advanced classes? Was that something that happened when you got arrested? Was I ever going to be able to ask a girl out again? Because I was 14. I would like to ask out a girl. I stole the breath spray so I could ask out a girl. Then I realized, what girl is going to want to go out with me now that I have done this? The first thing they're going to think of is the fact that I'm a thief and the fact that I have a criminal record. So I'm never going to ask a girl out again. And it was all of those thoughts going through my head as I laid there. And heard my dad get home. And this was before cell phones, so he had no idea until he actually got home. And I remember him like, hey, and I could hear his voice. And then once again, no yelling, just talking downstairs. And they were talking, and then I kept waiting, and then waiting. And eventually they came to get me and my brother, and they brought us both downstairs. And they explained to my brother what had happened. And I just sat there at the dinner table with my head down. And they were like, all right, we're ready to talk. I said, okay. And they go, here's what's going to happen. They go, you're grounded. I go, uh-huh. And they go, that's as much as we're going to do to you. And I looked up, I was like, what? And they go, oh, no. That's not the end of your punishment. That's the end of what we do to you. Because what you have to realize now, hon, is your life changes. There is no punishment we can do to you worse than what life is going to do to you moving forward. Your life changes from this point forward. What you need now is you need someone to love you. You need someone to support you. And that's where we come in. Don't get us wrong. We no longer trust you. You've ruined that. We no longer look at you the same. You've ruined that. But you're our son and we still love you. And we'll be here to support you. Your punishment is that you go to school tomorrow. And you go to wrestling practice tomorrow. And you go to school every day this week. And you go to wrestling practice every day this week. And you are going to have to admit what you did to every single person that sees you. And you are going to have to live with the consequences of this choice. That is your punishment. At the time, at that dinner, it seemed easy. And I was like, I'm getting off so easy. But it turns out, parents know what they're talking about. Sometimes parents are wise. Because they were dead on. There was nothing they could have done to me that would have been worse than what happened that week at school. And I needed them more than I've ever needed parents before. Because it was one of the toughest weeks of my life. Going to school the next day, it started on the bus with just the whispering and the kids looking at you. And if you've never been in that spot where you hear the whispering and kids looking at you, and you know every conversation is about you, it's not a happy place to be. And then I got to school, and the whispering became kids calling me names. Banaka was the easiest one, and they would just yell Banaka at me and then run away laughing. They called me thief, but really those were the easy ones. Kids who were just bold and dumb and stupid and just yelled out names, those were fairly easy to deal with as far as the week went. Oddly enough, it was the kids who didn't do that who made it much tougher. It was the little things that they did. It was walking into my English class with these kids I'd known for years, and been friends with for years, and walking in already feeling awful, and then having a girl look up, see me, and then watching her expression change. And then as I got closer to her, have her move the stuff on her desk to the other side of the desk so it wasn't near me, which seems like a small thing, but that implication was, I'm a thief, and she can't trust me. And it hurt. And then sitting in class and having the teachers not bring it up, but seeing the teacher look at me and having that teacher know, hurt. And it was little things like that that stuck with me. And my mom was right. Having to go through that week was one of the most painful things I've ever done. Eventually I had to go to court. My mom took a day off work, and I had to dress in a little suit and tie. If you've ever been to Noblesville, that's the courthouse that I had to go to. It's no longer a courthouse now. It's like a business building like that. But that was the courthouse I had to go to, and there was an actual judge I had to stand in front of. I wore a little tie, and I had to go in front of the judge, just like you see in an actual courtroom. I went into an actual courtroom and had to go before him. and they had to present the case. And the judge looked through it, and he said, "Mr. Broviac," and I stepped forward. He goes, "Did you," and I was like, "How do you plead?" And I was like, "Guilty, sir, I did it." He goes, "All right." He looked at my little records I had there, and he goes, "All right, well, you don't have a criminal record." I was like, "I don't?" Because apparently, when I was 7, that didn't go on my criminal record. That just went on the yelling at you record. So I was like, "I don't." He was like, "And you've been a good kid up to this point." I was like, "Yes, Your Honor." He goes, "And you have good grades." And I did. My freshman year at that time, I had like A's or close to it. So I was like, "Yes, sir." He goes, "But you screwed up, son." I go, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "But I think overall you're a good person." I go, "Thank you." He goes, "Here's what's going to happen. I'm putting you on deferred probation." You know what that is? I have no idea what that is, sir. He goes, "Probation is where you have to check in, and we have to keep track of you, and you have a parole officer." I go, "Yes, sir." He goes, "That's not happening to you yet. I'm deferring yours, which means nothing is going to happen to you today." I go, "Uh-huh." He goes, "But that's not all." I was like, "Oh, okay." He goes, "Here's how deferred probation is going to work. Nothing happens to you at all until your 18th birthday. And if you get to your 18th birthday, and you never run into a policeman, and you never do anything bad, nothing will ever happen. And it'll be like this never existed. And on your 18th birthday, I expunge this record, which means I wipe it from existence, and you move on with your life." I go, "Thank you, sir." He goes, "But if you ever have your name run by a police officer for anything, if you are speeding, if you are out past curfew, if you are at a party, and the police officer runs the name of people there, I am putting on your record that you are to be pulled in and brought to jail immediately. Not only will you be pulled in and brought to jail immediately, I am putting in your file that you are to come stand before me again. And I will punish you to the full extent of whatever it is you have done. And I will punish you to the full extent for this crime also. And you'll be punished for both crimes. Do you understand that?" I was like, "No, I understand that, sir." He goes, "If you don't get in trouble, this disappears. If you even get in a little bit of trouble, you're going to get everything thrown at you." I was like, "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." He goes, "All right." He goes, "I hope to never see you again." Oddly enough, I did. But it was at my wedding. He was at my wedding. Turns out he was best friends with my wife's parents. And so I remember him sitting there, I'm like, "Judge Barr, how you doing?" I'm like, "I went before you when I was 14 years old." So it was a fun bonding. But other than that, I never saw him again. Because the thing we're going to talk about tomorrow is a whole different story. And so that was sort of the walk away from that one. 2 things that connect to this. 1, I was still on the wrestling team, which I'll talk more about in a moment. But like after school, when my friends would go over to McDonald's and the drugstore, I did not. I stayed at school and I sat in the hallway. And I just did homework after school every day. Excuse me. I remember one day I was sitting in the hallway. It was the day of a wrestling meet, and I was sitting there just doing my homework. And this was probably 2 weeks or so after everything had happened. And it was still rough. Kids were still making fun of me. It was still not a happy time. And I'm sitting there writing, doing homework, and I look up, and I see this kid walking down the hallway towards me. And I recognize this kid. He and I were not friends. He was in the same grade as me, but he was scary. He was a kid that when we were in junior high together, he had gotten suspended for bringing a knife to school. A different time he got suspended for smoking at school. Another time he got suspended for getting in a fight in school. Another time he got suspended for picking a fight with a teacher at school. So he scared the bejesus out of me. And he'd been held back more than once. And so we were like freshmen, 14, and he was driving to school because he was like 16 in the same grade as me. And we were looking up and seeing him and like, "Oh crap." I look back down. I'm like, writing harder. I'm like, "Don't look up." And I could tell when I looked up, he looked at me, and we did that moment of eye contact. And I looked down, but I noticed his direction changed. And he came right at me. And he walked right up to where I was sitting in the hallway. And I was just sitting like against the wall in the hallway. I'm sitting there writing, and I see his feet come up. He's wearing these big old cowboy boots and these ripped jeans. And he stood there right in front of me, and I didn't look up. I'm like, I'm not looking up. He goes, "Hey!" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Are you Broviac?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Didn't you just get arrested for stealing breath spray?" And I was like, "Are you kidding? This guy's going to start on me too?" I was like, "All right." So I put down the pencil with him, and I was like, "Yeah, I did." And I looked at him, and his expression wasn't what I expected. I expected hate or anger or mockery. But it was almost concern. which I'd never seen in his eyes before. I had looked in his eyes often, but every time I ever looked at him, it was always like he's going to kill somebody. But the look of concern threw me off. And he goes, life sucks right now, doesn't it? I was like, yeah, it does. He goes, kids making fun of you? I was like, yeah, all of them. He goes, yeah. When I was in 7th grade, I got arrested for stealing pencils from a store. I was like, okay. Really? He was like, yeah, one of the dumbest things I've ever done. My dad beat me that night. I was like, okay. He goes, my friends made fun of me. And I was like, uh-huh. And he goes, and I thought it was the worst thing I'd ever done, and I felt really bad. And I was like, okay. He goes, but you know what? Uh-uh. He goes, it got better. He goes, after a while, something else happened. Kids got distracted. They stopped paying attention. And it gets better. If you stay strong, you'll get through this, kid. He's like, just hold on until it does. All right? I was like, okay. And then he just walked on. One of the weirdest experiences I've had in 40 years. And for him, I'm sure it was a throwaway conversation. But it's one that still made an impression on me 30 years later. And it's the idea that this guy had no need to talk to me. But he went out of his way to stop and just say something nice. And it helped. His advice was some of the best advice I got during that period of time. From anyone that I knew, adult, kid, or anything, he was right. Within a few weeks, something else happened. Kids moved on. They have short memories. And something else became the big issue. And I was no longer the one being made fun of. By the end of that year, it was this faded thing that kids would bring up on random occasions. Within a year, no one even brought it up anymore. But at the time, it seemed like the worst thing ever. And it's the idea that taking a moment to say one nice thing to someone, it can be the thing that changes their life for years. It can be that thing that they end up telling stories about. And it doesn't even mean anything to you. And for me, it was that little thing that I remembered years later when I became a teacher, about being able to say that one nice thing to somebody and being able to help them out. That's paper recycling, and that's not paper. Put them on my desk and I can recycle them for you there. The other thing was, I remember being on the wrestling team. Here's how my coach found out about me being arrested. That was the day of a wrestling meet. I was not on the bus to go to the wrestling meet because I was busy being arrested. But my friends were on the bus. And as they were taking off on the bus, the coach was going through doing roll call. And remember, he got to my name. He was like, Broviac. I couldn't answer. So all the other wrestlers started laughing and giggling. He's like, what? Where's Broviac? And we're like, he got arrested. He's in jail. He's like, ha ha, very funny. Where's Broviac? We're not kidding. We saw it. It's the greatest thing ever. Who's going to care? We're going to take a picture of it. And so that's how the coach found out, which apparently makes coaches really grumpy. So the next day when I had to show up because my parents made me, I went to practice, and Coach was not happy. And he did things now that would probably get coaches fired. He spent the first part of practice just yelling at the whole team about the fact that this one idiot child made the whole team look bad. We are all labeled thieves and idiots because this one kid's choices. Do you understand how bad that makes all of you look because he is on our team? Well, I'm like, oh, I feel like a turd. And I just kept shrinking smaller and smaller. Then the coach decided that wasn't enough. So he says, all right, here's what we're going to do. Today, we're going to do throwing practice. And if you're not a wrestler, throwing practice is where you practice throwing people, where you get them into a headlock and you throw them through the air until they land hard on the ground and you try to land on them. Usually the main part of throwing is you try to inflict pain on the other person so they stop moving. I weighed about 140 pounds. Coach got to pick my partner. He picked a senior who weighed about 200 pounds. And he looked at him and he goes, Todd, I think you need to help Broviac learn a lesson today. And Todd went, yes, sir! And I was like, oh, God. And he goes, start throws! And so Todd threw me. And I went, my little feet in the air was like smack onto the ground. It got to the point where Todd would start the throw, and then he would jump into the air, to get up into the air, and then land on top of me. And I made little squeaky sounds when I landed. And then it was my turn to throw, but I could not throw Todd because he outweighed me by 60 pounds. And I'd be like, and he wouldn't move. And the coach would be like, Todd, I guess it's your time again. And so he kept on throwing me. It was an impression that was made on me. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about how this affected me over the next 4 years and moving forward.